During the first 8 weeks, the First World War, Franco-British troops stopped the German advance in France at Marne and fell back at Aisne, where they dug in. Following the race to the sea, the trench warfare began. Many troops entered the war on the false pretext that the fires will end by the Christmas, but it wasn't materialized, and instead the war turned into a bloody stalemate. Many peace initiatives arose before Christmas 1914, from 101 British women's suffragettes to the women of Germany and Austria and Pope Bendict XV begging for an official truce. Men from both sides ventured into no man's land on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day to mingle and exchange food and souvenirs, spreading a series of informal ceasefires known as the Christmas Truce. Fraternization, peaceful and sometimes friendly interactions between opposing forces, was a regular feature in quiet sectors of the Western Front. In some areas, both sides would refrain from aggressive behavior, while in other cases it extended to regular conversation or even visits from one trench to another. On the Eastern Front, Fritz Kreisler reported incidents of spontaneous truces and fraternization between the Austro-Hungarians and Russians in the first few weeks of the war. Truces between British and German units can be dated to early November 1914, around the time that the War of Maneuver ended. Rations were brought up to the front line after dusk, and soldiers on both sides noted a period of peace while they collected their food. By 1st December, a British soldier could record a friendly visit from a German sergeant one morning to see how we were getting on. Relations between French and German units were generally more tense, but the same phenomenon began to emerge. This behavior was often challenged by officers. Lieutenant Charles de Gaulle wrote on 7 December of the lamentable desire of French infantrymen to leave the enemy in peace. Other truces could be forced on both sides by bad weather, especially when trench lines flooded, and these often lasted after the weather had cleared. The proximity of trench lines made it easy for soldiers to shout greetings to each other. This has been an efficient way to arrange informal ceasefires. Roughly 100,000 British and German troops were involved in the informal cessations of hostility along the Western Front. The Germans placed candles on their trenches and on Christmas trees, then continued the celebration by singing Christmas carols. The British responded by singing carols of their own. The two sides continued by shouting Christmas greetings to each other. Soon thereafter, there were excursions across no man's land, where small gifts were exchanged, such as food, tobacco, alcohol, and souvenirs such as buttons and hats. The artillery in the region fell silent. The truce also allowed a breathing spell where recently killed soldiers could be brought back behind their lines by burial parties. Joint services were held. In many sectors, the truce lasted through Christmas night, continuing until New Year's Day in others. On Christmas Day, Brigadier General Walter Congreve, commander of the 18th Infantry Brigade, stationed near Neuve-Chapelle, wrote a letter recalling that the Germans declared a truce for the day. One of his men bravely lifted his head above the parapet, and others from both sides walked onto no man's land. Officers and men shook hands and exchanged cigarettes and cigars. One of his captains smoked a cigar with the best shot in the German army, the latter no more than 18 years old. Congreve admitted he was reluctant to witness the truce for fear of German snipers. Bruce Bairnsfather, who fought throughout the war, wrote, "I wouldn't have missed that unique and weird Christmas day for anything. I spotted a German officer, some sort of lieutenant I should think, and being a bit of a collector, I intimated to him that I had taken a fancy to some of his buttons. I brought out my wire clippers and with a few deft snips, removed a couple of his buttons and put them in my pocket. I then gave him two of mine in exchange. The last I saw was one of my machine gunners, who was a bit of an amateur hairdresser. In civil life, cutting the unnaturally long hair of a docile Boche, who was patiently kneeling on the ground whilst the automatic clippers crept up the back of his neck. Captain Robert Miles, King's Shropshire Light Infantry, who was attached to the Royal Irish Rifles, recalled in an edited letter that was published in the Daily Mail and the Wellington Journal and Shrewsbury News in January 1915, following his death in action on December 30, 1914. Friday, Christmas Day. We are having the most extraordinary Christmas day imaginable. A sort of unarranged and quite unauthorized but perfectly understood and scrupulously observed truce exists between us and our friends in front. The funny thing is, it only seems to exist in this part of the battle line. On our right and left, we can all hear them firing away as cheerfully as ever. The thing started last night. A bitter cold night, with white frost soon after dusk when the Germans started shouting Merry Christmas, Englishmen to us. Of course, our fellows shouted back, and presently large numbers of both sides had left their trenches, unarmed, and met in the debatable, shot-riddled, no-man's land between the lines. Here the agreement all on their own came to be made that we should not fire at each other until after midnight tonight. The men were all fraternizing in the middle. We naturally did not allow them too close to our line and swapped cigarettes and lies in the utmost good fellowship. Not a shot was fired all night. Of the Germans, he wrote, they are distinctly bored with the war. In fact, one of them wanted to know what on earth we were doing here fighting them. The truce in that sector continued into Boxing Day. He commented about the Germans. The beggars simply disregard all our warnings to get down from off their parapet, so things are at a deadlock. We can't shoot them in cold blood. I cannot see how we can get them to return to business. A German lieutenant, Johannes Niemann, wrote, grabbed my binoculars and looking cautiously over the parapet, saw the incredible sight of our soldiers exchanging cigarettes, schnapps and chocolate with the enemy. General Sir Horace Smith Dorrien, commander of the Second Corps, issued orders forbidding friendly communication with the opposing German troops. Adolf Hitler, a corporal of the 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry, was also an opponent of the truce. Many accounts of the truce involve one or more football matches played in no man's land. This was mentioned in some of the earliest reports, with a letter written by a doctor attached to the Rifle Brigade, published in the Times on January 1, 1915, reporting a football match played between them and us, in front of the trench. The truth of the accounts has been disputed by some historians. In 1984, Malcolm Brown and Shirley Seaton concluded that there were probably attempts to play organised matches, which failed due to the state of the ground, but that the contemporary reports were either hearsay or refer to kickabout matches with made-up footballs such as a bully beef tin. One recent writer has identified 29 reports of football, though does not give substantive details. Colonel J. E. B. Seeley recorded in his diary for Christmas Day that he had been invited to football match between Saxons and English on New Year's Day, but this does not appear to have taken place. On the Eastern Front, the first move originated from Austro-Hungarian commanders at some uncertain level of the military hierarchy. The Russians responded positively, and soldiers eventually met in no man's land. The truces were not reported for a week, eventually being publicized to the masses when an unofficial press embargo was broken by the New York Times, published in the neutral United States on 31 December. The British papers quickly followed, printing numerous first-hand accounts from soldiers in the field, taken from letters home to their families, and editorials on one of the greatest surprises of a surprising war. Coverage in Germany was less extensive than that of the British press, while in France, press censorship ensured that the only word that spread of the truce came from soldiers at the front or first-hand accounts told by wounded men in hospitals. The press was eventually forced to respond to the growing rumors by reprinting a government notice that fraternizing with the enemy constituted treason. In early January, an official statement on the truce was published, claiming it was restricted to the British sector of the front and amounted to little more than an exchange of songs, which quickly degenerated into shooting. The press of neutral Italy published a few articles on the events of the truce, usually reporting the articles of the foreign press. On December 30, 1914, Corriere della Sera printed a report about a fraternization between the opposing trenches. The Florentine newspaper La Nazione published a first-hand account about a football match played in the no man's land.